looked at a lot of different things, and I know there's StreamYard, and I looked at a few other things, but I think we've done probably about 800 shows on this format. I've only had a couple of issues, never anything major, but it's pretty good. And the other thing I like about it is it keeps us under the radar. So we don't have everybody congealing on one site, because we did have some problems with censorship, through past, in our past. But yeah, so like, it's funny because people go, God, what happened? Your views are down. Well, it depends on what page you're looking at. But yeah, it's really under the radar. Like the Ike episode, I think, is around 75,000 views, but you can't see it because it's 20 here and 10 here. And yeah. So I was a little bit concerned because I thought, well, having them on alone might get us censored. Not that I really lose any sleep over it. But the funny thing was, the next morning I came downstairs and all 2,500 episodes had been deleted off Facebook.
Ooh, my God.
And I couldn't go live. And then I went and did a few things, came back, and everything was cool. So it was just an aberration. Okay, so we got, oh God, we're already, okay.
We're rocking.
We already got 30-something people in the house.
Yeah.
I can't play, let's see if I'm just going to check. Yeah, still can't play any videos. So no intro today. So this beautiful couple's going to do a little song and dance for us real quick. Oh, I love the energy. So yeah, this is this is a really great way to end the week, because number one, I don't know the guest, which is always a great place to enter a shared space. And then also they are a couple, which has been something that's been more and more prominent through 2020, and Morgan has a way of finding that energy, so I'm excited about that. And then they also mentioned something about sacred sexuality, and everyone knows I love that because we talk about it quite a bit. But yeah, so it's nice to sit, and you're young, which is great, because when I started doing this a few years ago, it was pretty much, let's say, 45 to 55 age group. You didn't have a lot of 25 to 35, or even, but there's been more and more of that infused. And I really think that's important to share that frequency and code, through conversations like this. So I just want to, formally, even though I'm not very formal, we're not really polished pros, but I want to, welcome you and thank you for coming in and sharing space and honoring us with your presence and being open. And certainly, open as you want to be. I mean, we respect your privacy and all. But yeah, I just want to say thank you. Welcome.
Yeah, and thank you also, Todd. It's really exciting to be a part of the project here and seeing the lineup that you've had and the many conversations that you've had with so many different people. It's it's really a great honor to be here, and thank you very much also.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I don't know which one of you is more handsome.
She's beautiful. I'm handsome.
There you go. Yeah. So you guys obviously have a synergy that's obvious. How long has this been going on? I mean, how long ago did y'all meet? And were y'all awake before you met, or was that part of the process?
Yeah, well, we're just coming up to 2 years now, which isn't really a ridiculously long time, of course, but the productivity, the efficiency, the ground that we've been able to cover, given the nature of the union here, is just mind-boggling in a way. So we had both gone through different separate awakening journeys. My journey very much started, as does most people, with an investigation and an inquiry from the mind, from the mental plane. Still, it's the personality questioning its own patterns and doing some of that initial shadow work and all of that sort of thing. But there came a point where there was a deeper call that was happening, and in that process there was a very extreme, very full-on crucifixion. I would say a crucifixion of the personality self. And I don't mean that the personality disappears, of course, but a very significant switching point where where the body and the mind was no longer being run by the personality conditioned consciousness, and it was very specifically switched into, it felt like a penetration by spirit through the heart. And in some of the esoteric teachings, they call this the path of the heart through the sutrama. It's accessing consciousness directly through the heart. And of course, many people, including yourself, probably many of your listeners, know sort of what I'm talking about. But there's different phases to the opening of the heart. There can be the coming into soul and universal love and soul awareness, and kind of that return to the divine child.
Yeah.
But there's a deeper layer, which is where spirit itself, as a transcendental force of lightning, enters and crucifies and opens completely in to out. And so in that, there was a very quite frightening, excruciating meeting with the dweller on the threshold, the shadow self, that fundamental lower nature controller.
Yeah.
And James had gone through a similar thing, both being initiated into that process through life crises, as many have also experienced. And so what had happened was we had both, in our own paths, awakened to the flame of the sacred masculine.
Yeah.
And in that surrender to God completely, that inner devotion of, I will be willing to sacrifice anything of my lower nature that is not in alignment with that highest truth. Make a commitment like that, from my experience, of course, life brings you that opportunity to, for us, it was an invitation right away into a container to really dissolve and melt.
Yeah, and just one thing on that with regard to us coming together was actually both of us giving up on the prospect of ever having a relationship again. Like, we'd both gone through difficult relationships and we got to this point of letting it go completely. And then all of a sudden there was something that brought us together, but it was in a way very unfamiliar.
And this, of course, is when it becomes not just a soul connection, not just soulmate, but somehow deeper. It's even more primordial. It's even more prior to any kind of individuality, even the individuality of the soul. And I can say that there was nothing in my wiring on the human level that was a match for James, and vice versa. We had been wired for a very different kind of person. So it was really like we were, it was an arranged marriage by God, which doesn't sound so good, of course, because there's a sacrifice of our personal will in that. But we came into that mutual commitment and agreement to face whatever was going to rise in that container, with all of those imprints that we have, right down to ancestral, individual karma, even the soul's karma, all of these untouched places that run so deep into matter, so that this could all be touched and divinized.
Mm-hmm.
Good gosh, I'm cutting this part out and put it in the remix. That was a great synopsis of the pre-connect, or the pre-physical connection, and just really encapsulated everything. Just like, that's just, I got to sit with that for a second. That was really interesting, because, like, there's certain characteristics, I've probably done about 70 couples now, on the show. And there's a lot of similar characteristics, just as there is in the individual journeys. A lot of people have the same kind of storyline. But one of the things that I've heard a lot of, and Morgan and I, it's the same for us, and that was, we both said, if it can't be absolutely perfect, then I'm not interested. We both were actually celibate. I was celibate almost 5 years. She was celibate almost 4 years before we ever met. And I think that says something energetically. It's the same thing you were saying. You were saying, I'm not going to chase that anymore. And if it comes, it comes. And then I also picked up on what you were saying too, how there's a providence involved, divine will. Something's going on, which I know when we met, I knew right away. She knew but didn't admit it, I think, at least for a couple of weeks to herself. And then about 2 years later, after we got married, to me. But that is that there's some kind of force that's working with you. And it's a little bit freaky at times, right? I kept telling myself over and over, this is too good to be true. Like there's, she just fits like a glove, and this was 17 months of a virtual relationship, no physical. And, but I kept telling myself I'll accept this. I accept this. And it's good. It's this or something better with this person or somebody else. And she pretty much said the same thing, because it's so profound. Like you don't want to mess it up. You don't want to attach to it. And, it's just a new territory. And I think it's starting to get more traction now. But did you guys have, how did you meet? I mean,
I was just going to say, when you were speaking about online, it was exactly the case for us. Exactly the case.
And something interesting about the online thing, because James had more traction and had gathered a sort of smallish following through writing sacred heart poetry. And as he was going through this heart crucifixion, awakening not to the soul, but deeper than the soul, to what we would call the monadic kind of contact, that lightning sword, he was writing divine poetry, very much in that kind of category with me and that Christian Sufi mystic writings. And it was a deep divine heart transmission. And I had read, someone had shared a poem or something, and I had read the poem. And I had just come into that recognition, that penetration of spirit myself. And so there was a strong recognition of the spirit point from which the speech was emulating. And then it was just a drawing that happened there. And he didn't respond at first. There was just a little small contact. And
did you message him? Did you bust the move?
Yeah, I messaged him first. I just, yeah. Reverse. So
divine feminine, man. It's a new way. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and it was just a complimenting on the work and just saying, this is really touching me right now, and this is very much speaking to my experience. And actually, talking about synchronicity and, the will of being itself in support of these sorts of unions, an older gentleman who had a beautiful sort of surrendered transmission as well, who had known James, had seen me interacting with some of James's posts, and he went and spoke to James and said about me, and I had never spoken to this individual, but he said to James about me, this is an amazing individual. And so he kind of just gave that little push. I mean, you don't know how these things work, and yet they just seem to kind of spin into that alignment. And then it was like we had one text conversation, and then and it was just, online, without even having yet even like a face-to-face conversation or like a digital face-to-face. And it was brilliant and terrifying.
Yeah.
Terrifying because, again, there was no, like we had said, we had both given up any part of the individual that was seeking or had preference on relationship. None of that was relevant anymore, because we tried that and it failed miserably.
Right.
And many people are being initiated now through that experience, especially women, I would say, but women and men too, with that, the feminine aspect of the relational. It's like the union within existence, within form, within matter, the embodiment, so sort of the feminine wisdom here. But yeah, and then that was done. It was like we had a wedding in a way in the transpersonal realms.
Mm-hmm.
And
there was just this sharing of what felt like fire between us, and I was just feeling fire and heat through my body for probably 2 weeks.
It was like a 3-week burn, and a burn together. Like seriously inflamed. The cells were inflamed, and I had already that heart crucifixion. I had been touched by the flame, and then it was just this round, and it was very rapid downloads of like preparatory wisdom. And I had not done a whole lot of work with my mind at that point. My mind was very noisy, but the mind was like frying with just trying to translate all of this kind of initial input.
Yeah.
And then since then, that 3-week period, it's basically been an integrating of all of that which was found in the transpersonal realms in that first few weeks, and a descending into, so we met at the heart, and then it was like I dropped into the belly. All right, belly wisdom, trauma healing in the belly, and then, you know, calling him down, and then going into the mind, and the whole thing.
Yeah, what a dance. What a dance. Yeah. So James, when you were, because I write, you know, and of course I was doing Soulogy for what, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years before I met her. And there was a part of me that, even though I'd given up on, you know, seeking that relationship, there was a part of me that, through my expressions, and I kind of knew this, but I wasn't like verbalizing it. And then I, kind of admitted to myself later, but I was trying to find her, reach her, have her see me. When you were writing this heart poetry, or whatever you called it, was there a part of you that was expressing yourself to her?
In the first instance, what it felt like was that there was a longing in my heart to be completed by God. And actually it was the masculine that I felt completed by first. So there was something in me of this cry in my heart that everything and anything, I don't care about the personal self anymore, I'll sing. And the more that I did that, the more that I spoke that and declared that, the more that it felt like God came through the heart. But then there was a change which actually happened before I met her and we had this interaction, where there was this, it felt like there was this call through more of my body for woman. It felt like there was something that was actually coming into the depths of woman, something that included the belly and included the sexuality and included the legs and all of these things. But it was still feeling like there was a strong movement of the heart in that too. So yeah, my writing, there was actually, just before we started, we met, my writing started to shift into woman and how woman can open man, and how all of this sort of thing was happening. Yeah.
That's similar to my experience. And I started because I was writing I don't want to say general stuff, but it was all about the I am soul, pain into, wisdom, and, suffering, and alchemized into expansion. And then I went through this period. I don't know. I did about 1,500 meetings, and probably 30 of them, I just went through this period right before we connected, where I started writing about, what people call twin flame, which, and that was a big part of it. And I used to tell, I'd show Morgan one or something. She'd say, well, I wasn't around when you wrote that, but she actually was. It just wasn't by conventional standards. So when you guys came together, you said there was this big fire. Okay. Now, were you guys in the same city? Were you guys? No, you weren't. So there was how long of a period was there before you had a physical encounter, and how do you feel the time served you before you actually met in the physical?
Well, very quickly after that initial meeting, Risa did say to me, I have to see you. I want to come to where you are. And so that was probably a month after we met that she ended up coming to where I was living. But prior to that too, I also felt I had to go and see her. So I flew down prior to her coming up. But what we saw, though, which was something that people probably see a lot, is what we had touched and experienced in the place beyond these bodies was out of alignment with what we were experiencing in the flesh. And so we came together and we were like, it was very funky. It was very like, what do we do here? How do we bring these bodies together? How do we relate in this way together? And so we started to see that there were a lot of difficulties. There were a lot of difficulties that we had to work through.
Yeah. And again, because we were not wired for each other at the human level, and even I would suggest at the soul level almost, it was like something even prior to. I had what I'd sensed to be soulmate connections in my life.
Right.
in other places, but this was like not even, there wasn't even soul recognition. It was just something so much more primordial even, and the initiating impulse. And so what that meant was that, yeah, just as James was saying, it like that divine union was just, it just brought up all the ways in which the human vehicle was disintegrated, which is of
Right.
course what it's meant to do.
Right.
But so we had, you know, he came here for a little bit and it was very intense for a few days, and then he went back home, and then, you know, we had like a 2-week sort of cocoon together in his city, and it was just so intense. I mean, we were basically horizontal for most of the time because of the level of pain that had been brought up in the body. We were pretty much dysfunctional, you know, barely getting to basic functional acts of care, just because the intensity that was brought on by the union really ignited such a full-on purification and a really rapid bringing up of everything. And so it was still some months in that first initial phase where it was like too much to be together physically. It was like we were unified up there, but we were doing this preparatory work, coming together occasionally in the flesh.
Yeah.
But I mean, talking to each other every day online and doing the process work, and oh, now this pattern's coming up and this pattern, and all this, like, you know, mother wound or this father wound. So, I mean, we were working with each other constantly, but it's just so fascinating. And this is the invitation that we have with the online sphere today, is that, you know, we were not ready to, we were not incarnated enough to be in the flesh yet.
I got you.
So,
Yeah. That's interesting what you're saying about the human to human, because so Morgan and I think we've always gotten along. You know, everybody has their, especially on this journey, you know, I mean, but you know, as time goes on, it's just smoother and smoother and smoother. And so last night we had a particularly incredible, it was very good, experience together. It was a beautiful, sacred sexuality, merging of the physical and the non-physical and so on. And I remember last night, because in those moments, and we can talk about this in a little bit, there's such a multidimensionality involved. You know, all of your aspects, or many of your aspects and her aspects, are involved. And I remember saying to her last night that the hardest connection, and there was probably like 10 words said the whole night, and I probably said 9 of them. But I said something like, you know, in other words, I realize now that the human connection is the most difficult one. Not that it's difficult, but that it's not like the rest of them. The rest of them are just like this, you know, in the ethers, in the other dimensions, you know, which I've seen many times. I mean, we're just like, you know, peanut butter and jelly. Not that we're not here, but then I think what I ended up saying was, you know, that's true, that the human to human, because of, you know, the whatever, is more challenging. But the gift of that is that we'll be able to transmute or alchemize, transform into, you know, an experience that the universal hasn't had before, because they're going through the human. So that resonates a lot, you know, what you said. Now, how long did that period take? You said you've been connected for 2 years, which in my opinion is a long, long time in this day and age, because I've met couples that have been together 6 months and they're solid, you know, and then I met some that have been together longer that are not, you know, or whatever. But how long did it take before you guys threw in all together and just said, let's move in together and live in the same city and all that?
Pretty quick.
oh, it's probably the 8 months in, 9 months, about that. And that was like, we had done the preparatory work, and then it was just, together constantly. And that's basically been the case ever since. And it brought up a whole bunch of new challenges. But again, that's sort of incarnating enough to, okay, now we can be together in the flesh. And that real radical meeting of all of these different aspects coming up. And as you mentioned before, something about the flow and the beauty and the harmony that is possible. And it's just, that's increasingly the experience. It's not that there aren't challenges, because every time there's a deeper drop into the humanity part,
Right.
a deeper drop into the incarnating into matter, into the feminine principle, bringing the union down into the mud where it becomes rooted, and the divination of matter, the proper union of him and her. Every time there's a drop, there is new challenges and new ways in which the pain of the feminine emerges, and then new challenges for the way he has to come in as consciousness more. And it's always a friction point. There's always a death wanting to happen, always a letting go of the self, always a meeting of the fear, always a touching the resistance and wearing that down.
Yeah.
And yet, even though those processes are challenging, the commitment and the capacity has matured enough that there's a harmony present even through the disharmony.
Yeah, and what I'm seeing with the relating is the more that we work through those parts of the human conditioning, my conditioning, her conditioning, I start to experience what comes through this being as more of the masculine principle. In terms of the kind of, we could talk about this in terms of sacred sexuality or making love.
Right.
And then what I see is not Risa, I actually see the feminine principle coming through her body.
Yeah.
And then what that feels like through, as the masculine through me, is this burst of love to love woman, no matter what, to love her deeply. And this is the fascinating journey of it.
No wonder you guys are on today.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the nature of reality is very androgynous, of course. A woman must integrate her masculine, a man must connect and love his feminine. But what we do see in the process of coming into matter, coming into the body, is that, and it's kind of a paradox, because this happens as a result of disidentifying from your body. In the revelation that I am not the body, I am not the female body, I'm not Risa. The revelation that he is not the male body. Like that opens consciousness up to make it incarnate even more. And in that, paradoxically, the essence of nature, the essence of the body, like the rose, like the lily, comes forward really fully to live out the fractal embodiment of those universal principles.
Yeah.
So we unified at the heart, sacred masculine, and then it was like deepening for me into that womb and opening and meeting the she and bringing that up from the ground. And in him meeting his earth, his woman, a stabilization of the masculine heart, of the protector, lover consciousness. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That's again, like one of the things that to me, the sacred sexuality is the purest representation of the energetics, right? Like that's like the concentrate, everything that goes out. I don't mean diluted in a bad way, but it's mixed up with other elements or whatever. But that's such a solid, concentrated, energetic field. It's just the two, right? And so like I get what you're saying, both of you, because it is like everything, there's levels. And I remember like last night learning at a higher level, at an expanded level. And again, the two being together being a metaphor of the energy, right? And so in the dance last night, what I got was, and again, this is a physical representation of an energetic situation. So in typical, in the typical past we're all used to, the man is what? He's dictating, he's performing, he's mechanical, he's straight lines, right? And as time has gone on, I've gained more and more sensitivity to her. And again, her being the feminine divine, that is the mother goddess, that is Magdalene, that is Morgan, they're all one and the same. So what I'm getting at is I hit a level last night, which has got to be not something just specific to us. It's got to be something that's become more available because of couples like you. And that was that I almost totally removed that offensive, not offensive in a bad way, but the directing of the encounter, and allowed her to, not to dictate it so much, because that's not really what the feminine's doing. It's just more of a flow, more of a natural thing. And, you know, for a man who's been conditioned, you know, at 59 years old, and, you know, you hit a certain level of stimulation or whatever, excitement, and you want to just, you know, like a tiger, like a lion. But that's one of the things I noticed, and it came through really big last night, where it really is an equality. But in order for you to have the equality and for him to feel the essence of not just her being and movement, but his own, he has to back away from all that programming and that conditioning. And I think both of you really just said the same thing, what I just experienced. So there's no coincidences. Mm-hmm. Now, have you, it sounds like the both of you were kind of like at the same place. And I don't mean level, because if I look at Morgan and I always told her from the day I met her, you know, you're an ET and I'm from the earth, right? So there was a lot of polarities, which I'm sure you have, but in terms of intel, it was two totally different trips. You know, I'm dealing with the plants and the trees and the elementals, and she's dealing with the galactics and so on. But it sounds like you guys were kind of speaking the same language. It sounded like you had a very conscious coming together and progression. Were you guys talking about this from the get-go, about what's going on and what you're feeling, and you know, and you know, the different things that occurred?
Yeah, I mean, it just had to be a radical honesty and a complete relaying of what was happening. Yeah, we met in the most transpersonal realm, and like I said, it was something deeper than the soul even. And when we're speaking about soul, there is still there is the soul's gifts, there is the soul's orientation, there is the soul's kind of the lineage, or like whatever is there. And it's not that there isn't soul present, but the meeting came from something even more primordial. And if we're talking about spirit itself, we're talking about the origin of all forms, which precedes all forms, which is why it was quite frightening, because there was nothing at the individual or even soul level that was like naturally resonant with one another, but we were resonant in our devotion to God, in the commitment. Yeah,
and the thing that just to speak about what we were sharing, it was this willingness to give up everything for spirit, and that was it, and just letting everything happen that needed to happen, everything unwind, even if there was pain, difficulty, everything, just letting it all go for the sake of that together.
Yeah.
And of course we have different leanings at an individual level. We have our different sort of personalities, soul expressions, yearnings, gifts, talents, of course. And of the nature of coming together in a transpersonal way is in descending that love, in descending that universal force. It allows for the opening and like receiving enough love and nurturing to be able to emerge as those unique gifts. So it's that paradox of no self merging into the one beyond any individual expression, which makes the individual expression that much more able to express, simply because you're not identified or getting stuck in the troubles of the lower nature. They have to be dealt with and seen and met, but there's something more infinite at the foundation that is able to transmute and transcend and merge. So, I mean, it was just being unified in that process together. And there was just a knowing that this is what we're here to do, and we've been assigned each other for this work.
Yeah.
And
have you guys experienced energetic separation? Doesn't mean you physically separate, but I mean, have you experienced periods, hours, days, weeks, whatever, where you energetically separate? However it happens isn't even relevant, you know, but you energetically separate to kind of pull in your energy back as an individual, and then you come back again to expand again. Does that ring a bell?
There have been phases of that where when we were in these earlier phases of coming together, we would go through something, and then it became very clear that we would need to go separately, and that meant physically, and also there was an energetic movement away. What would happen as we would go through those phases is usually, for example, for me, the energy would be pulled back to me so that I could meet more of my own feminine.
Right.
And when I connect deeper into her that way, then I would feel even more connected to this one.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden there'd be a deeper connection formed.
And that's a little different from what you were saying, where it's like, do you separate to kind of make sure you're staying in your like self-center and doing your own nurturing things? And of course there's that which happens, but that movement doesn't require the energetic separation so much. I mean, in how we articulate the wisdom through us at the moment, through our work, we refer to this kind of movement together as one-bodied relating. And it can be a little confusing if our only experience of union or that kind of connectivity has been codependent,
Right.
as different from interdependent.
Right.
That
Right.
If you don't know the difference, then they can look similar on the surface, but they're deeply different, because in the interdependence we recognize that we are one entity together. We are a third vibration together.
Yeah.
But that is the direct divine child birthing of our individual parts. And if there is anything in us that was codependent, or I need you because you are myself, anything like that, because of the nature of this container, we just right away you'd just get knocked back, and it would not work.
Right.
It would have to be dealt with. It would have to be purified. We were never able to codependently enmesh because we weren't wired for each other.
Right.
So, yeah. So in terms
I see what you mean.
what he was saying with the energetic vibration.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more like what you're talking about. It's just a matter of, sometimes during this transition we call ascension, regardless of whether you're in a relationship or not, you just got to be alone. Like you got to okay, what's happening? Let me take this in. Sometimes your body that just says, sometimes the noise just has to go away or whatever. It's not necessarily but I mean, it's like a powering up, and obviously in retrospect, it's almost like here's the way I would describe it. It's like, and this has actually happened to us when we connect at night. It hasn't happened in a long time, but they'd come in and say, are you ready to move to the next level? Like, are you ready to expand? And the answer is yes. And then, are you willing to give up everything, including each other? And yes, we are. Now, every time that happens, whether it's consciously spoken to us or we consciously hear it or not, we always come back, and there's a boom, there's an expansion. But this type of surrender probably isn't the right word. This type of surrender is one that you have to mean it, right? Like you have to really mean it. Just like you said before y'all met, you both made that commitment to the divine. Well, you can't fake that. You can't just give it lip service. So you actually had, and that's what I meant by energetic separation. We know we're never separate, but I mean, you energetically give it up, just like you both did before you came together, and then there's that expansion, that boom. There's a lot of I don't know what that is, but there's a lot of talk over the years, a lot of different meanings given to and connotations given to twin flame, right? And that's okay, because that's just part of our journey. Just like ascension can take a beating as well, that word, or light worker or whatever. Did you have a lot of the fire episodes, that people talk about, some that sustain the relationship and some that don't, whether they be short-lived or longer periods of time? Did you bring out the best in each other? You know what I mean? These episodes of projection and blame, these old programs coming to the surface to be removed. Were you so conscious and connected on that level where you weren't, because you weren't wired the same, that you were able to handle those things? I mean, does that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, there was such an acknowledgement of what was happening when we came together that there was not, it was extremely conscious. At that time, I had a little bit more practiced experience of
Right.
kind of investigative shadow work and belief work. I mean, James had his crucifixion and had been getting the downloads, but that kind of practical aspect of, oh, I'm sensing when a projection comes up, I'm noticing it because of this, and oh, okay, this is how it's operating. That kind of, that sort of the detail-y, kind of nitpicky mechanical stuff. You know, that was something that I had to kind of initiate him into it originally, with like getting him into the practice of hyper honesty and voicing exactly what was going on when it was rising. And, you know, I had a movement through relationship failure into learning a lot more about, you know, and I'd experienced so much of that directly. And he had also, but he hadn't had any sort of direct experience of engaging with that level of honesty. So there was an initial period of kind of help, like initiating him into that kind of normalizing, and making that part of the practice. It's like, oh, okay, this is rising. Yes, be honest about this. Don't withhold. Don't keep it separate and da-da-da. Where now, I mean, it just, when it's there, and the process is like just, it's always
It's not, I totally relate to that. I want to go to James on this one. And this is, I've actually noticed with the couples I've interacted with, and really Ascension in general. I mean, the female incarnate seems to be leading the way. Like they've got a well, women's intuition. You know, they've got like this connection that we're more connected to the earth. I don't know how it works, but it was very much the same thing. I was not familiar with modalities or processes or even the talk. I was just more of a creator, you know, let's go make a video. Let's go write a poem. Let's, you know, I didn't have that, which sounds like what happened with you guys. James, were you able to understand her? Because I know the first time Morgan came at me, she's like, oh, you know, we need to look at this. We need to look at that. And I'm like, hey, what are you picking on me for? You know? So I went into defense, and it wasn't because it was more because I didn't understand any of it unless my shadow. Granted, there was shadow, don't get me wrong, but I had no idea. I thought Ascension was just go out and shine your light, you know, and you know, everybody's going to see it and it'll be contagious, and you did your part. I didn't know it was all this digging deep into all the BS and the shadow and all that crap. And so I struggled with that. I admit that. It took me a while, but how did you respond to it, James? Were you able to pick up on it quicker than I did?
Well,
great question, by the way.
There was a lot of process in that, and I found that when she would bring me reflections and things to look at, much like what you're saying, there was a rejection, there was a turning away from what she was saying, and part of that was because I didn't really get it. But what had to happen was what had to happen in me was actually growing a new set of ears so that I could listen to what she was saying and find the love enough to go through. Even if I didn't understand the intricacies of it, I was willing to learn, and that was the thing. It's very similar to what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I just hit the point where, and it was a little bit challenging, and I thought you were going to see it grow a new set of balls, because I had to do that too.
Me
and
too.
The reason I did is because I gave up and I know this sounds strange, and I caught a lot of crap for this. So this is 4 or 5 years into Soulogy, and I had a certain persona, not that I cared because I didn't. But when I met her and she came over for the first time, I started getting these messages of, you're giving up your power. And, you know, literally someone said to me, where are your balls? What's happened to you? But because I knew who she was, I made a decision that even if the human aspect doesn't understand 1 iota of it, I'm going to do whatever she says, because I know there's a part of me innately that knows. Like I told her, I remember telling her this a couple of years into it. It was it took me a while because we weren't together all the time. It was 10 weeks and then apart 9 months and then together 12 weeks. But I remember telling her from the get-go, I know who you are. I know who we are. This is day one.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, I reflected and said, but I knew I didn't know how to get there. I knew you did. Right. So yeah, I'm glad to hear this. This is a nice validation for me, because I thought I was the stupidest man on the earth at some time.
I'm the same. I was exactly the same in me. And it was also a part of, I just felt like I just wanted to trust her no matter what. I wanted to give it a shot and trust what she was saying no matter what. And that's been good. And that's worked out.
What you're saying there is exactly what I was going to say. It comes down to the trust.
Yeah.
And the trust might not be there at a human level, because when we start engaging in these relationships, we have all the imprints that come up. Oh, I'm the man, and all the way the mother issues, and where I've been manipulated by women.
Mm-hmm.
Like all of that stuff comes up. And so that can affect man's ability to be able to discern what is genuine vulnerability and genuine wisdom versus a manipulation. So all of these things have to come up. So if, like you said, you knew who Morgan was,
yeah, I knew she.
That could be the anchor
Mm-hmm.
that would allow you to listen. And to answer the question as to the why, because you said, I'm not quite sure why that happens, but it seems to be the way that with the women. Mm-hmm. Metaphysically, what we understand is that it's because of the feminine essence, because of the womb in particular, the sensitivity to the unconscious that comes with that. It always means, particularly, and it's not that you can't have an intuitive man, but when you start having these containers with people in divine union, you're going to see these principles come through the body. And woman is always going to be sensing and hearing like the input that he can't quite see yet or know in himself, because she can feel his and his feminine. And so what you said about coming into the balls, it's like she is bringing him down into his balls to emerge as the manhood. But in the initial phases, he's not going to like hearing that because of the false security of the male ego, which is like keeping itself safe from meeting, of course, man's own vulnerability, his own tenderness, his own wounds, which are also the gatekeepers to his manhood. So, I mean, it's beautiful how it.
Yeah, that's a great description too. I mean, it really is, and I think that's all he needs. And again, we're talking about people, but we're really talking about energy, because this occurs inside of us. I mean, it's we don't need to get into all that. We have friends that have a divine union frequency that are not even romantic, right? Brothers, right? Or same sex, or I've even seen opposite sex that are the male is more the feminine, and what I mean? I mean, it's an interesting thing, but I think when it comes to the masculine, all he needs to know is who she is. That's it. Because once he knows who she is, there's not a damn thing that's going to stop him. He's either going to make it or he's going to die trying. And then I think what you said is very true. She sees things that he can't see. And it also works the other way. But the other way is less important, because we're talking about earthly functions, and we're talking about, more the human part of us, which I see coming into play now. It's starting to come into play now. There's things coming into play now where I can look at things, and I've always went, okay, I get the rhythm of her now more. This is where I can, through my energetic example, where I can assist or I can merge with her. But that first part was the most important part, because the second part wouldn't happen unless she remembered, So that's another great validation. Now, the other thing about the dance and the journey of the male, well, in most cases, the male incarnate, female incarnate, is she also understands sacred sexuality. She is more in touch with it. Women are more emotional, men are more physical. I mean, this is not rocket science. So now we move into this ascension period, of this transition we call ascension. And the things that we're describing transferred into the proverbial bedroom, because we know sacred sexuality isn't just, the type of intimacy that we think of in 3D, but in that regard, I found that and I have to ask James this, but I found that that also went into the proverbial bedroom. All the performance, all the expectations, the things that we thought had to happen, like, orgasms, ejaculation, just all this programming had to go. So
Yeah.
it was kind of like when my balls got thrown out the window, so did my libido, my erection, everything had to go until I'm standing there with nothing.
Yeah.
Yet she's still there.
Yeah.
She doesn't care. She's still there. She doesn't care. And once I could, this is actually a question. Once I could fathom that amount of pure love, not only that it was coming towards me, but that I was at myself, then things started to change. And I thought, why did I wait so long? Can you relate to that, James?
Yeah, I think it's beautiful what you say, because I've had to go through, and I'm still going through a lot of this, a lot of control, a lot of expectations of self, a lot of ideas, culturally conditioned ideas around sex, around what it is to do that, and to actually go all the way back to parts of me that feel like a little baby when it comes to this, that feel like a little boy. To have her there with me, and also me with me, but have her there. Like, we had something happen the other day where we were laying down together, and I went into a little boy, like a little boy that didn't have any concept of anything to do with sexuality and any conceptualization of any of it. And this really, the first time where the meeting with that boy and the love of him, I relaxed so fully into my sexuality that we then had probably some of the best intimacy we've had. But it was through that kind of letting go of everything, all of that cultural stuff, coming into the boy, acknowledging how I really feel, which is fragile, vulnerable. How do I do any of this? Like sometimes I'm there and the mind has, like, there's no idea how to do any of it.
Yeah.
And then I relax, and then there's something can happen. And it's a complete rewiring of it all.
Yeah.
Reversal of the biography, meeting the entire timeline of what has happened there. And of course, when we speak about the sexual energy, we're talking about the relationship to your most basic relaxation into yourself. That is the life energy. That is the baseline of the joy of the human being. And it doesn't actually have an object in its inherent nature. And of course, little children are like that before the kinks happen.
Right.
And sometimes we get the kinks early on because of, parental stuff or abuse and all of this. So, like you say, you were stripped down all of that identity around the genitals, like all the way in which there's all of that has to get emptied out. And to bring it back to something you mentioned before this particular tangent, where you were saying that at a certain point you were able to see Morgan and see her patterns and bring, and then come in as the masculine wisdom to support in that. I mean, that's exactly what we've experienced, where initially it was me as woman initiating into a proper kind of capacity for the meeting of these things. And then at a certain point of his dissension into himself, the man started to come forth as that archetype, that essence, and would start to open and meet me in those places, and open me as the woman body where all of those issues are as well. And
and also on the sex thing, what I feel happening now is it's a movement. Like, the sexuality is a movement coming through the heart rather than the genitals.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's like I'm the attraction and the arousal comes through how much I want to love her.
Yes.
Like, and then the body comes, it's a different energy.
It is. Yeah, I'm fresh off of one of those episodes. I'm feeling this is a perfect collaboration. And I make jokes because I'm just a little kid, but it's very true. What you're describing is something that needs to be talked about. I think particularly for men. Somebody told me the other day, and I hate to make that distinction, but if she led, then he's bringing something to the party after a certain point. And I think it's important to talk about it. And I think there's more of a challenge there because we didn't have that intuition, number one. Number two, we had this conditioning that came from a different direction. It's one thing to make a choice and say, no more of this, I'm taking my power back. It's another thing to say, no more of this, I'm giving my power up. You know, that's the castration, the demasculation. But what I was getting at is like, so this thing that you're talking about with the heart, right?
Yeah.
Where your fingertips have 1,000 eyes and 10,000 fingers, you know, there's all these amazing, what would seem to be non-physical attributes and qualities that start to come into focus when all that stuff gets removed. And I can remember now, I can tell you now, when we come together, there's no talk anymore in my head. Oh, you need to do this. Oh, you're not good enough. Yeah, right. Yeah. It's all gone now, but it hasn't been through a discipline of, you know, let's say a Zen meditation. Oh, you came, you're gone. You came, you're gone. It's not been like that. It's been what you talked about. It's been this relaxation, this, and what you also talked about, James, being vulnerable, not resisting it. And then you get into situations where you can have, let's just use something people are familiar with. You can have a full penetration and not move. And not move for 15, 20, 25 minutes. And it's mind-blowing. Not only is it mind-blowing in the physical, but you've got all this dimensional stuff going on, right? And I really think that one of the exciting things about what's happening now is this sacred sexuality, which is not just confined to what we think of as romantic sexuality, is actually a frequency representative of the Trinity energy. That third energy is created. You know, you mentioned Rumi earlier. You know, he wrote about that. He wrote about when two people come together, whether there's a physical or not, a physical baby or not, there is a third energy produced, period. And that's a very important thing. But I think what's happening, these experiences are being anchored into the earth through this description that you're giving. And then it's expanding, you know, through that invisible to the human, holy divine matrix, new matrix. So it's a fascinating proposition when you think about the power and the creativity behind it, the creative power. And like, you know, I'm going to tell Morgan, or she told me, I don't know who said it first. She probably said it first because she's a bit smarter. And all you got to do is love me. I'm like, oh my God, this is the easiest job in the world. I mean, sign me up, you know, like that's all we got to do is love each other. Whoa. And the thing is, we don't even know what that is today. We've like dipped our little toe on one foot into the water of this vast ocean. And that ocean is nothing more than, you know, just a huge multiplication, exponential expression of what little divine experiences that we've shared, like you have. It's amazing.
Yummy.
Yeah,
Yummy is right. Yeah, Emmy's right.
And this is why I sometimes feel to say that when relationship is it's not a casual thing. It's not just something that it's not a casual thing. It's not a light thing. It's something that there's such a deep well of potential that is there. And it's not about being serious or controlling about it, but it's a sincerity. It feels like there's such a sincerity in what can happen between people when they come together like that. Yeah.
And it's the return to your deepest nature. I mean, and of course, we're dealing with the eons of the separation from that nature, which is why the fundamental simplicity of what we're talking about, because it is simple, so challenging. And so woman is bringing him into himself, which is the heart. And we're saying about the purification of the sexuality to where it becomes the animal is unified with that heart. Because if it's not about shaming the animal, but if it's just the animal, it can be a taking or a domination, and it's a play of power. Or it's a mental game or something. But when it comes into the heart for a man, then it's that acting out of the gift of consciousness of the love that he has for her as his basic essence. And for women to come into her deepest receptivity and the nurturing and the openness and that whole vortex of the magnificence of creation itself there. And I mean, again, it's the simplicity of returning to our deepest nature, and yet it's still something that's it's still hard for people to get to that point, to be willing to be daring enough to jump into that well.
I agree with that statement. I would say that about myself. It's such a colossal field of potential, right? And I'm a big believer that I hear people say, everything happened at the same time, the universe went, and everything was, past, present, future. But I'm a big believer that we take the Akashic and we combine that with our experience to create a new third energy that the universe learns and experiences in the moment and as it's created. And there's such a huge field of potential and magic and unknown and mystery and ecstasy and all of whatever you want to call it in what we're talking about. And we've only had one little minutia of experience that it's a little bit freaky to the human being. Like, I mean, I don't mean like we don't, like, say, I'll just use myself. I don't want it, but it's just like, oh my God, what do I have to do today? It's no different really than being in that same situation of like, I don't know what to do. And so what, at least now, you keep pushing through, and then, that you go for it, because it's
that's the
we have to start a
fearlessness.
series on sexuality. There's a lag. I'm sorry.
Yes, no, that's all right. No problem. Yeah. I'm just feeling and drinking up all that you're saying in the courage and the potency and the willingness for that. And, and this is repeated in many of what I would consider true tantric lineages and communications of the tantric wisdom in this way of this union. The feminine vortex will bring up all of his fear, the fear of the loss of self, because of course that's what it's about. It's the loss of self, and then I emerge as man, as the divine lover and the giver, and it's like that's it. That's the fullness of my potential and that I am, and nothing survives in the turning inside out and coming into that. And she tends to, from our experience, and also this is confirmed in the conversation that we've had with other people in these lineages and the path like this, that the woman will meet it's like the resistance in her to receiving love and the density of the inherited parts of matter and all that. So it's like the fear, and it's always fear for both. At that primordial point, it's fear, and then the resistance, and then always that choice of the next layer that you spoke about at the beginning of the conversation of that point of, are you ready for the next layer? Are you ready for the next level? And it's an inner movement. It's an inner movement that, as you say, cannot be faked or synthesized. It is an inner movement of the being that brings forth that next level of game, we could say. Yeah.
And there's no rush either. That's another thing. And I love what you said too, because if you think about, we talk about the energetic implications of, I'd say, on our DNA of our lineage, which we call our ancestral lineage, however you want to put it. So you can take in the example of women being oppressed and, being labeled as witches and burned and murdered and raped and right? And how over the last few years that energetic impression imprintment on the DNA or whatever has been transformed, and you see them coming out. By the same token, if you just look at the core, even in the 3D, even before 2012, however you want to define it, distorted or not, the physical intimacy or sexuality or sexual power or lack thereof was the core, most concentrated part, of the fusion of the physical and non-physical, right? So if you have this dominant gender that's always in control, always getting their way, you're naturally going to have on the other side, the other gender is going to be resistant. It's going to be, so this is what we're bridging. And it's an inverse kind of looking thing, like a mirror image. And they look totally different. Here we go, the polarities. And yet these relationships and frequencies like it, because I'm sure they must be out there. Maybe they're not, I don't know, but they're breaking it down. So it's so cool because we don't have to go out and instruct people in a coliseum with 100,000 people. This is being done through the nonverbal. It's being done through the energetic transformation shared by two people. Yeah, so this is a fascinating subject. We're going to have to start a series on sacred sexuality, and I'm going to talk Morgan into hosting it.
Wonderful.
That's a joke. Everyone that knows her knows she's not real, wants to get in front of the camera. So I'm just playing around. But yeah, fascinating stuff. So I didn't even ask you. I'm going to make sure you have a chance. Now, do you guys, do you do any type of session work? Do you have any offerings online? Do you have a website? Do you have, Facebook page, stuff like that? I mean, obviously, I'd like for people to be able to reach out to you. And then if you have something that you offer that they'd be interested in, obviously, we'd want them to be able to get in touch with you. So go ahead. The floor is yours.
Well, we call it core integrity. So core integrity as in getting to the core essence of the human being and helping people to do that, and doing that in the form of the relating as well. So we do a lot of one-on-one work with people, couples that are doing what we've done or in the process of that, and helping them through whatever challenges, whatever opportunities are there, helping people to incarnate these principles of the masculine and the feminine, understand that process a little bit more in a more detailed way. So yeah, there's lots of one-on-one work. They can find us on Facebook under Core Integrity.
Yeah, or you can add us, and we're there. The website is core-integrity.com.
Oh wait, that's your website?
Core-integrity.com. And we do individual sessions. There is a community option as well.
Okay,
if they want to dive deep together as a group and experience the group morphic field as well. That's an option for people that want to take the connection deeper, and that's for a small nominal monthly fee.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you got core-integrity.com. We put that on all the platforms, and Core Integrity on Facebook.
Facebook, Core Integrity on YouTube as well.
Oh, Core Integrity on YouTube as well. Okay. Yeah, this is really really good. I enjoyed this. Thank you so much. Yeah, this is very cool. Yeah, we should do this again sometime and see what we can always get back together, later in 2021 and see how big our balls have gotten, James.
Yeah. Thank you, Todd.
Yeah, it was really awesome to meet you, and just thank you for all the listeners that have tuned in. It's a pretty steady view count, which I think says something about the fan base and how people enjoy your show. And it's been beautiful to connect and share space together today. So yeah.
Thanks for the service you're doing here. Thank you very much for doing this.
Yeah, you're very welcome, and thank you for honoring us with your presence and being so open with us and having a nice discussion. All blessings to you both and all your endeavors.
Thank you.